All right, welcome back. We've taken a little hiatus for about 5 weeks, but we're back in business. My name is Pete Deely, and you're listening to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. Professor, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome back, everyone. Looking forward to be here. So excited. It was 5 long weeks that I was missing to be here with you on our mornings. How are you doing?
Professor, como você tá?
Doing good. Estou bem, estou bem.
So, the small number of Portuguese phrases that I've been working on, I asked the professor how he's doing, and I wanted to start with that because he's been in Brazil, which is his home country, and we want to talk a little bit about it. And so our break was because traveling, not easy to do podcasts on the road, and professor was away, and we decided that he's going to focus on being at home or at his home country, and then we'd resume that. And we want to talk a bit about Brazil and Brazilian culture and maybe the connections between, why was it a good place for jiu-jitsu to thrive? And then, we talk about some other things like the food and all of that. I will tell you, Professor, since you've been gone, we do have one additional subscriber to the Submission Coffee program. And
Let's
so
go.
so I think the deal is you don't get to fire me as long as I keep going forward. So we need 20 more. So we have 4 subscribers. We need 20. It's a modest number. Those of you listening, awellrunlife.com, take you to the page. And if you're local to us, you can pick it up right in the gym. And if you're not local to us, we will mail it to you. But we just need to get to 24 to keep our relationship with the local roaster. So maybe
Let's go, guys. Everyone drinks coffee, and why not drink a good coffee, right?
that's right. Plus, you saved my job. The professor says he's watching me closely. So I know it's been what, 5 years since you got to return to Brazil. It's a long time
Correct.
to be away from friends and family,
Mhm.
and it's a long time to be, you came to this country, and that's a lot of adjustment. So when I watch you teach, I'm always like so amazed and impressed about lots and lots of things, and the ability to teach in a second language, is extraordinary to me. You also seem to be ambidextrous, right? I always talk about it. I can't believe how good he is going to his left and to the right. So, you know, you came here, and I can't imagine that experience didn't force you, in a sense, to grow, to expand your perspective, to be, we always talk about being comfortable when you're uncomfortable,
Mhm.
being in a new place, having to learn a new language. I mean, all those things must have expanded who you are as a person, expanded your intellectual capacity, your
Yes.
emotional capacity. So you're here, and all of this growth is happening. And now you go back to what was familiar to you, the place where you grew up and where you were born.
Mhm.
So my first question is, like, what was that like? What was it like to come back to Brazil with a new set of eyes? Because you went there, you returned a different person than
Yes.
you left.
100%. First of all, it was amazing. First of all, we tried, guys. It was 5 weeks on, on that we didn't do the podcast. Wasn't planned. We tried to meet a couple times
Yep.
for different reasons. Maybe my nephew was at home making a lot of noise and then he couldn't make it, or the internet connection wasn't that good. But and then we ended up being 5 weeks, right, without doing this, which I missed it a lot. But talking about Brazil, was amazing to be back. It was so good. Like you said, it was 5 years since the last time that my wife and I were able to get back. We did. We saw a lot of family and friends on this between these 5 years that they were able to come here and visit us. But yes, for sure, still missing a lot of the friends and family, and plus that feeling on be back on the place that you grew up and spend most part of your life. Was a funny transition on the very first moment that we arrived. It was like trying to compare all the time, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I was even talking with Peter guys before we start. My first impression, maybe the first couple of days, was just critiquing everything. Like, oh, why the streets so small? Why the
Yeah. Yeah.
cars they need to pass so close to each other? Why how that motorcycle guy like flying between the cars and making noise and like dangerous to drive and
Right.
this and that and this and that. So I was just like critiquing everything, right? We live in Arizona, which is a real kind of, I guess, good traffic and a lot of space between the lanes and everything. But on the moment that you start to get on grocery stores and see friends and family, it was an amazing feeling. And like you said, uh, now like 5 years later, coming back a little bit older, and knowing that I live in a
Yeah.
different place, I was be able to enjoy the best the country and my city has to offer.
Yeah.
Uh, the place grows so much, business are thriving, my friends and family are doing great. So it was awesome. Even
So,
was able to get back on my first race bar high school,
oh
trained
yeah,
with my
yeah.
very first professor, which was amazing experience.
That's interesting. I didn't, I think I saw a picture on Instagram about that, but did, and how did it go? Did you, was he, did the dynamic change? I mean, now that you're a professor, I mean, or was it like, look, I taught you, and
Yeah,
when you
so
rolled with him, was it pretty clear that he was still the teacher or,
you know that we don't talk about training, right? We have that rule, but I would say that he still has my number. He still
yeah,
it was awesome. Like because when I first started, he was a brown belt. He was a like a 20 years old, 19 or something.
wow,
He got a black belt a couple months after I started, and now he's a fifth degree black belt
wow.
and in a really good shape, still young, still like 43, 44 years old,
Yeah,
and
just a kid.
still the same, but better.
So, I mean, in your like those 5 years, because I mean, that's there's a lot of growth that happens in those 5 years of a person's life anyway, right? But you
uh,
had a lot of experiences that not many people have. And I'm always of the opinion that the more you feed a person, in terms of experience, if they have a critical mind, if they have a self-awareness, then they grow more than the person who doesn't have a lot of experiences because their inputs are fewer. So it's just harder to they have to get that person out into the world, or sometimes people can do it through books, but I mean, you had
mhm.
this grand journey and it stretched you and made you grow in these different ways. I want you to talk a little bit about Brazilian culture, but before I do, I'm just curious, was there anything that like you remembered liking a ton and then you went back and you didn't like it quite as much, and then conversely, is there anything that you're like, you didn't really think about it that much when you had it around you all the time. But then when you went back, you're like, man, this is awesome. I didn't realize how
Yes,
much I missed this.
that happened a lot.
People aside, right? Like, obviously, you miss your friends and family, and like
Sure.
that goes without saying. But I mean, just the other parts of the experience of being there.
Yeah, no, for sure. That happened a lot. That happened a lot. Like, especially about places.
Yeah,
It's always like that, right? Well, for those who doesn't know, my wife and I, we try to explore a lot
yeah,
America. We try to travel as much as we can to national parks and road trips, and it's really common that people come to us and say, "Oh, you guys already know the country more than I do, and
yes, right,
I'm
right,
American, right?" And but it's the same it's the same thing in Brazil, right? Now,
right.
when we got back there, we didn't have that all that desire to explore the country and see different places.
Yeah, right.
And is that thing you take it for granted, right? When we were back there to Brazil, we were looking to the sky the whole day,
Yeah,
like looking the trees, looking the man,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
how nice is that little house? How I never paid attention on that.
yeah.
Or that park is amazing. It was really like that a lot of times.
Right.
Like, look, this we need to be able to do that in America, like try to bring something like,
Yeah,
business side, food restaurants, whatever it is. But
right.
we had that a lot.
Yeah,
And we had one or two things that I was so looking forward to go to that specific place
right,
to eat that food that I was craving. And I
right.
think I was just putting so much expectations.
Yeah, yeah.
And or maybe it was just a bad day. I don't know.
Sure.
But and then we had that like, okay, that's is
Yeah.
good, but I
Yeah,
thought it was better.
right.
But overall, it was the opposite. It was like just admire things so much and
Yeah.
like, man, this is really awesome. Like that's a really good place and that's really cool.
Yeah.
And
I
like you
think,
said, I
yeah,
think at first, 5 years ago, I was living there and I always love it, by the way. I always love it, the place that I live.
sure.
But I was less compared with jiu-jitsu. It's like the competitor competing and the coach looking from outside,
Yes.
right?
Right. Right.
Now my vision is from the coach because I
Right.
don't live
Yeah.
there anymore. So I can
Right.
see things way more spread out and have a better, not a tunnel vision of the competitor
Yes.
sometimes,
Yes.
right?
Right.
But be able to see a little bit more. And also those 5 years away, taking always something positive from everything that happened
Yeah.
was really good for my wife and I focus 100% on our life here,
Right.
on the business, on the competitions, and embrace the American culture as well.
Yeah.
So it was really nice to get back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that experience of going back and forth between a home country and that, but I live, with you in Arizona, Chandler, Arizona, and I'm from, a place in New York that, uh, like the fabric of your life is kind of informed by what do the houses look like? What are the
Mhm.
how are the places that you go eat constructed so how do they meet the street? What I mean by that is like we have these malls, right? So you go in or like a strip mall or
Yes.
whatever. And so it's back from the street and you're kind of there. Where like I lived in a neighborhood where the stores were pushed to the sidewalk. And so you would either park on the street and then you would be walking kind of up and down the street, which may sound like a small subtlety, but is really different.
But that's how it's in Brazil.
Yeah, right. I mean, so
Yeah.
that's a type of thing that when I would go back and I'd go down to the stores or whatever, it
Uh-huh.
it felt different because the proximity of like where these stores were and where cars were and where people were kind of forced to interact,
Mhm.
especially if I go into the city. I mean, New York City is a special place, an unusual place. And when I'd spend time in there, not needing a car, out
Mhm.
west in the United States, you need a car. But
Yeah.
lots of people who live in the city never like a car would be, unnecessary and wasteful, like
Yes.
you got to go out of the city, we rent a car or whatever. So, I mean, um, and for many of my New Yorkers, friends, like, why would you ever leave the city anyway? We got everything in the world, right here. So I mean, that coach's eye, you go back, if we want to describe Brazilian culture to someone like myself, I've never been there. What what ways would you describe um, the Brazilian culture, particularly as it contrasts to probably most of the people listening to us live in the United States? But maybe you could describe it and then maybe make some contrast between, what you perceive here as the United States culture here, which is complicated in so many million different ways. And I'm sure
Mhm.
Brazil is equally complicated.
Yeah.
But in general, like what are some themes that you noticed?
Peter, I think that's one of the hardest thing to do, describe like culture in general for sure, but Brazil
Yeah.
is definitely a really interesting place. Like Rickson Grace says on his book, Brazil is a mix of Bangkok and New York and whatever,
Yeah,
you can
right.
find kind of like a little bit of everything. Uh, one, we have a say that in Brazil that we say like Brazil is not for the amateurs because
Right.
the one thing that is really awesome to see is the ability of the Brazilian people to improve, to to try to find something and make the best of it. Sometimes you're walking like I can't believe that that house is still up, because
Right.
the guy maybe didn't have money to fix and he just like started to do all kind of different crazy things to keep the house there. Or how come this motorcycle is passing through that small, like a cat that all of a
Right.
sudden passed through a small hole.
Right.
That's what you see sometimes happening. Just
Right.
because people need to thrive and need to make their money and they need to have the food for the family. So the ability on the Brazilian people to improve and try to figure it out what's happening. I think that's something that always compare a little bit of the sport, right? Like Brazil was always really good in soccer,
Right.
and not much. Well, soccer is a big part of the culture, but I believe that's my beliefs. Okay, Brazil is really good in soccer, not because of the amazing, not only because of the amazing coaches and structure for the players play, but for the ability to improve different players and
Yeah.
change
Right.
directions and find something that no one is fighting, kind of like have a extra pair of eyeball and
Yeah.
find something. And that reflects to the population in general. Uh, it's an amazing place to be, definitely a really good place for vacation. But like every country that is not a first world country, you're gonna have like a ton of issues on security.
Right.
Not everywhere, of course, but in some areas,
Yeah.
politics, and
Sure.
those things unfortunately drive the country down because it's supposed to be one of the best countries in the world for sure. Like no natural catastrophe, we don't have hurricanes, don't have
Right. Yeah. Right.
earthquakes, nothing like that happen. Just
Right.
like sometimes have like a really strong rain that things can fall apart, but it's supposed to be one of the best places on the world for sure.
When I, as an outsider and like somebody who knows Brazil from the way it exports its culture to the world,
Mhm.
and someone maybe had maybe studied it a little bit in school or whatnot. I mean, it seems like Brazil is comprised of like many of the world's cultures, and that the difference between a Brazilian culture that might have been an indigenous culture that started in Brazil, but then the culture now, which feels like so many people from all around the world came to Brazil. And when I
Mhm.
think of like the stereotypical Brazilian model, what Brazil exports in terms of beauty to the world, it's this like mix, in my opinion, the way
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see that beauty is like a mix of like lots of different cultures. That it,
100%.
as you look at a Swedish model, like
Yeah,
this has always been how these people have looked. But when I look at a Brazilian model or whatnot, I think, well, it took a lot of different cultures to produce this beauty.
yes.
And so I always kind of think, I wonder if culturally it's like that too, where, the expectations of all the Italian immigrants and all the, African presence there
Uh-huh.
throughout which has its own dark history in Brazil. And, in addition to, just immigrants in general, but I mean, it has its own,
Yes.
things that were tragic in its past, right, as it relates to
Yes.
Africans in particular. And then all the rest of it, and the fact that it speaks Portuguese means that obviously
Yeah,
Portugal
yeah.
comes there early on, and early on, relatively speaking, and changes the language into a European
Yes.
language, which is interesting.
Brazil is a huge mix. A lot of countries for sure, but mainly I would say Italians, Spanish, Portugal,
Right.
Germany more down south, and Africa, of course.
Right.
So it's really hard to see like a Brazilian and figure it out like, oh, he's Brazilian, because you're gonna see a guy that's completely different
Right.
and
Right. Right. Yeah.
raised for 5 generations in Brazil too,
Yeah.
and it's funny, and of course other countries as well, but it's really hard to. In America is a little bit like that too, right? Like America, you have like so many
That's my
different
favorite
countries
part of
too.
the
Yeah.
Olympics for being an American.
Yes.
Like, probably one of the times that I feel a real sense of patriotism is the parade into the Olympic Stadium, because it's the one group of people that you can't really tell, and Christy Yamaguchi is walking next to,
Hmm.
now, I mean, everybody's, it's the notion of a melting pot. I feel like, that's a moment when I really see it, because you can't tell just by looking at the American part of the
Yeah.
parade that they're in fact American. Um, well, near and dear to both of our hearts, when it comes to culture, is of course food. And you were sending me these great photographs of food, and as somebody who's really interested about the relationship between agriculture and eating, and like the how close the food is in terms of, when it was grown and when it
Hmm.
was eaten, what's the length of time in between it being ripe, and all of those things. When I saw the pictures that you sent me when it came to food, it felt like I saw a lot of very fresh. I mean, mostly they were pictures of produce, I guess, but I mean, what was it like getting to eat the way you did when you were, living
Uh,
there? And what
that
what
was
was the
great.
and what was the big differences between like those eating experiences and your day-to-day eating experiences here?
That was one of the things that we've missed the most. And well, here, Paul and I, we pretty much keep the same, almost the same diet that we do in Brazil.
Hmm.
So almost the same type of food, that we eat in Brazil every day. But it's still way different, right? And especially about the fruits, like just
Right, right.
tropical fruits, right? I'm not talking about the berries because if you want to eat good berries, that here, United States is the place, right?
Yes,
Like
right, right.
blueberries, blackberries, all kinds. But like banana, mango, peach, papaya, just name it, whatever you want.
Hmm.
And it is different just because it's just so fresh.
Yeah.
Just you get there and you eat. It doesn't need to have all that like collect way under like mature to be able to travel to come
Yes, yes.
here. And
Yeah.
it's not the same, of course. The climate is different, the soil is different, everything
Yes.
changed.
Yeah.
And there we have a couple markets. Of course, we have that the street market that's really big in Brazil.
Okay.
So I would say like 3 to maybe 4 or 5 days a week in different spots on the city, you're gonna have this street market,
Hmm.
and that those farmers that they bring their own like fish, meat,
Okay. Right.
fruits, rice, whatever you want through like they just got on their farm and they put it for sale.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the freshest you can get,
Yeah.
and that's is a nice cultural experience when you go to those places. And you also on the other markets they usually buy from those farmers as well.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
also super fresh. So fruit is a big part of the Brazilian culture to eat not just the fruit as a snack or something, but also make juices like mix juices
Okay.
with mango and orange and carrots and peach and
Oh,
this and
that's interesting.
is and that's something that we literally every time, even like I don't want right now, but I will get it just
Yeah. Yeah.
because I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is like, so like in our town, like Chandler, Gilbert area, there's a
Mhm.
farmer's market that happens. But it sounds to me like that dynamic between a small farmer growing something, bringing it and selling it is more day to day for where you,
Yes,
yeah. So,
day to day, and do have like specific spots each day.
mhm,
But for example, Sunday is a day that you're gonna have a ton of those spread out the city,
right.
and it's not in a actual market, right? It's one street that
Right.
is closed between I don't know 4 a.m. to noon.
Right.
So
Yeah.
no traffic there, and then you walk. Those guys they put their own easy up over there, and they start to
Yeah.
sell their things. So it's right in the middle of nowhere, middle
Yeah.
of the street, middle of the city.
That's great. Yeah. And it's funny. Like Manhattan, in New York City, has this odd like dynamic about fruits and vegetables where, you know, upstate New York, because there's such a giant market in Manhattan,
Mm-hmm.
uh, there's these fruit stands and these, foods that actually have like incredible produce that's much the same way. And so, the Hudson Valley and all these farms that are in proximity to that will just,
Mm-hmm.
run it down. They have these bodegas, these different places that you can get food, which is similar, which is contrary to, I think, people's thought of like a big city that, oh, you
Yeah.
didn't have that. So when I was looking at that, at your pictures, I was thinking a little bit about the pleasure of being able to get access to really fresh food, whatever that fresh food may
Mm-hmm.
be, that's, grown close by that you get. And I think I have an opinion that that really affects your health.
Oh yeah,
The
100%,
foundation
100%.
of your health is always sort of your food. And then, not saying that you shouldn't have went, but then I saw you did go to a coffee plantation and were drinking something other than some mission coffee. Now, Brazil's famous for its coffee, and I know coffee is actually a part of like your family's,
Yeah.
business life and all of that. So, tell us about going to a coffee. Would you refer to it as a coffee farm or a coffee plantation? Like, I don't know what the right term is. If you like, I think I use the term coffee plantation for no other reason that I think that's how I heard about like, well,
Uh-huh.
where coffee's grown. But if you're actually growing coffee, how do you
Yeah.
refer to it?
Well, I think would be a coffee plantation in a coffee farm.
Okay, okay,
You know, that was a really nice experience, which was something that I wasn't expecting. It wasn't a plan at all.
right,
Well, everyone knows I love coffee, right?
right,
Coffee is a big part of my day, big part of my life, and Brazil is well known for coffee. That's another thing that was missing a lot for sure. All different brands and really good
right.
coffee pot and amazing, right? Even when you go to restaurants, the way how they serve and
Yeah,
it's all about the presentation, right? Like
sure,
it's not just the coffee.
right.
Okay? It's not just give you a cup and that's it, but like it has a whole
Yes,
presentation for the
yes,
experience that you're gonna have as you drink the coffee. And we were able to go for different places, really good. Some of them that are open after I left the country, so it was my very first time. So that was really awesome to be there.
right.
And on my wife's state, so Paula, she's from Rondônia, and Rondônia is an amazing state on northeast of the country, northwest, sorry, of the country, and is well known for coffee,
Right.
other things as well, but coffee for sure. So my father-in-law, we were driving by, like, hey, you want to stop by on that farm coffee? The guys are
Yeah.
amazing. They have been winning all the
Oh,
awards
wow.
for the last like 6 7 years, not just on the state but on the country. And they uh anyway, yeah, let's go for sure.
Yeah,
Went there, and the guys that own the place and blend the coffee and toast the beans and do everything, it
yeah.
was absolutely amazing. It's a family of the father and three
Mhm.
sons,
Wow.
and they're all like doing everything, explaining everything to us. We were able to taste so many different type of coffees. We bought a lot of coffees. We gave some to some friends in São Paulo, but we also brought here to US. So soon we're gonna have yours,
All right, excellent.
and it was an amazing experience just to, you know, like we were talking about fresh, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The plantation was literally 20 feet away from where I was, and have the coffee there, toast right in front of me, and drink 5 minutes later. It was,
Yeah. Yeah, it sounded almost like like a going to a vineyard and tasting
yeah.
different wines that came from the grapes that were out in the vineyard. And like everything, like the more you learn about anything, there's always more to it
Mhm.
than you think, right? So um for example, like tequila, like when you're a kid, you probably had the worst tequila that's ever produced, and you think, oh, tequila makes me crazy. And then you're an adult, you might find that, oh no, there's all kinds of refined tequilas and all the rest of it.
Yes.
I think with coffee, it's similar. Like, people
Mhm.
might get exposed to coffee in an office, where someone's using terrible
Yes.
greens, and it's sitting in that coffee pot, and that's what they think coffee is. But,
Mhm.
you know, it's a for me, it's one of those special things in the world because it has so much variety.
Yeah.
And the closer you get to your experience where you're, on the farm drinking it right there, I think that's about as good as it could possibly get. But I don't know, I think of it as analogous to wine. Like you might have a real thin thing. Like you were saying, you had
Yeah.
one type of coffee and it had a very uh, light look
Uh-huh.
to it, but it had a big flavor, and
And
um,
even about the color too. I remember one
yeah,
of the coffees say like he told me, look, this one, it looks almost like a tea. you know,
Right.
is not that too black. So you think it's going to be super light, but it's not. So
Yeah.
just, I don't know what the variation that happened with that
Sure.
being specific, but the color is different than the taste. And oh, this one gonna be a little more, you're gonna feel like a hazelnut at the end. The other one gonna be a little
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
citric, and
Right.
it was really interesting.
Well, in a more prosperous future, I'm hoping that I get to go with you
Me too.
and have you introduce me to Brazil and go experience all these great stuff. Now, we can't conclude our conversation without like talking about what in the Brazilian culture connected to jujitsu in a way that we don't talk about Irish jiu-jitsu. We don't talk about Australian jiu-jitsu. We talk about Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And
Mhm.
so clearly there are champions, right, that call attention to Brazil as the home clearly of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and that becomes a dominant teaching method, way of learning jiu-jitsu in the world. So there must be something in the Brazilian culture that made it root there as opposed to other places, because we talk we when I think of soccer and its relationship to Brazil, I think about Pele, right? Like I think, okay,
Yeah.
I'm old, so when I was young, he was the most famous athlete in the world, besides maybe Muhammad Ali, and
Mhm.
um, the great champion. But Brazilians and soccer, like there's some connection there that's really
Yeah.
important. But you go to Germany, go to Italy, go to England. I mean, you see that replicated. I
Yes.
don't think I can say the same for jujitsu. Like Japan may have a great jujitsu culture, but they never really exported it in a
Mhm.
way that Brazil exported jiu-jitsu to the world, at least from my point of view. So
Yes.
what is that about? How come it was such a fertile place for it to root and then thrive?
I think it's the one is the ability to improvise, like you were saying
Mm,
at the beginning.
yeah,
You have the plan might won't work, depend on maybe something that you did wrong or how your partner is scouting and change the perspective of the fight.
yeah, yeah,
And then you need to improvise sometimes. You know, you might
right.
have already a plan A, B, C, D, but maybe you just have a open eye to see other directions, and that's something that is intrinsic on the Brazilian culture
Yeah,
in general, right? It's not it's a business that is not thriving for whatever reasons, and then the person needs to try and find something else. It's the traffic that is not allowing you to go on this
right.
direction. You need to go to and find something else. It's like it's
Yeah.
everything, and also is a little bit of taking away of the tough reality that can happen sometimes,
Okay.
right? Uh, I would say something that I don't know, people might think is wrong or not, but I would say anyway. Uh, One of the main difference that I see sometimes between America and Brazil in sports
Hmm.
is the opportunity that the America gives for the athletes to thrive in something else,
Right.
right? So if you're playing a really good, if you're really good in basketball on high school, you might gonna have a scholarship college. Well, if you don't turn in a professional basketball player, you're probably going to have a really good degree that's going to help you later on in
Yes. Right.
other
Right.
chapter of your life.
Yeah.
In Brazil, yeah, we don't have this. So you need to, in some point on your life, you need to choose between education and being an athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
If you don't have, I mean, if you don't have the really good financial support to do both,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not the reality of the majority of the country.
Yes.
So the really good athletes, so most of the times, just when I say most of the time, it's just because more of the population doesn't have this economic
Sure.
resource, right?
Right.
Uh, they need to. That's the only thing that they have. The
Right.
sport is the only way. Is the only takeaway from the tough reality.
Yeah.
It's the only way that they will do, because they don't have money to do education.
Yes.
They
Right.
never had
Yeah.
a scholarship to do a good education. So that's is our nothing, it's 100% over there.
Yeah.
So, and that's on soccer. So unfortunately, we have so many talents that end up never being something else for the sport because they didn't have the opportunity over there.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the things that it just helped. And then Brazil, thinking on that wave, some athletes were able to be smart enough to come to the exposure of the world, right? Come to
Right.
America
Yeah.
and teach jiu-jitsu, and and exposure for the culture and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I find that interesting. I mean, going back to the beginning of what you were saying, the notion of flexibility,
Yeah.
that you have to have an open mind for the circumstance. And, my perception about Brazilian culture is that it is similar to the United States in its melting pot nature, right? You got lots of different cultures coming together at the same time, which requires a certain flexibility because, like, not people don't look the same, right? Like a Brazilian, if you want
Yeah.
to take the typical Brazilian, you probably say, well, there isn't really a typical Brazilian. Like, our models may look a certain way, but if you come and walk the streets, people are
Mhm.
going to look along this whole wide spectrum. And I imagine that carries into culture, that there's a lot of different, like, points of view and ways that people grew up that is different. So I find that an interesting thing that, what's in many ways, at least if we look at the UFC, it's the critical element. If you do not have jujitsu, you're unlikely to ascend to
Mhm.
the highest levels of that fighting
Yeah.
world. And so, in my mind, that this idea of being able to anticipate the unexpected, to have the point of view that I don't have to necessarily do one thing. I can react to the moment, and that makes me a great fighter. Um,
Mhm.
and then grittiness, yes. I mean, I have family members that have coached and recruited athletes internationally, and grittiness lives most, like, if you live in a gritty situation, you are a tougher person than if you live in a soft, generally speaking, not on every case, but generally speaking, right? um and so the lack of options for athletes probably produce
Yeah.
a little more gritty disposition because there's
Mhm.
not a place to fall back on. And I don't know this for sure, but it feels like even if you're at the top end of the athletic spectrum in Brazil, it's not quite the same level of, like, business opportunities where sponsorships and, I don't know
Yes,
that,
yes.
right? I mean, it's not a as rich
Yeah.
country, so there's
And
just less options. So you really, if you're not at the very, very pinnacle of anything, you're probably
and if you're not it's crazy to see the difference between, like, if you're not a soccer player,
right,
good soccer player playing professional, that you're gonna be gaining like millions of dollars a year. All the other sports, even the professional sports, if you're a professional volleyball player, that volleyball is really big in Brazil, a
right.
basketball player. I will talk about those three because I believe those only three that will give you a
Okay,
good pay. But the difference between a really good soccer player pay against a really good basketball player or a volleyball player pay, it's insane.
right.
We're talking, let's suppose a really good soccer player will get a million, I don't know, like $500,000 a month, and the really good basketball player will get $50,000 a month.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And the guys represent you on the Olympic Games, and he's the captain of the team and things like that.
Yes, right, right. Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that speaks to some level, like, the global nature
Yeah.
of any given sport, like soccer. The more, I mean, if you're not a soccer fan and you go and learn about soccer, you recognize that when in the economics of the soccer business are the largest really on the planet because it's a global audience. And so on any given day, more people are watching soccer than anything else. And so when I think about, like, being an athlete in Brazil, in the United States, you're a great athlete if you go to a baseball team or a football team or a
Uh-huh.
basketball team. and you're that top flight, excellent athlete, you're going to make, just a version of the same type of mega
Yeah.
salary. But if you're in Brazil, and you're a great athlete, you're probably pushing yourself towards soccer.
Yeah, yeah.
If you can play volleyball or soccer, you want to get connected to the most amount of money. Now, I'm sure jiu-jitsu professors are just right below, the top flight soccer athletes in terms of compensation.
Yeah, right. And that is become a deep conversation. But what ended up happening is those great athletes in other modalities, right? But soccer need to go to other countries
Yes, right.
where their pay is better, where the culture on that sport's bigger,
Yeah,
right? So on basketball, for example, if you don't go to NBA, which
right,
right is really hard, you go to Europe, where
right.
the
Yeah,
basketball is Europe. They're gonna play Span League or whatever league it is, and
sure.
then you're gonna be recognized on the street. Like you're gonna have this feeling, right?
Right. Yeah, the United States is the one place where it's inverted from the rest of the world. Like as a college soccer player, as an uncle who played, like semi-professional soccer and professional soccer, great athletes identified early in their life end up being pushed to other sports. They usually a lot of American kids, when I was a kid at least, started like soccer was their first experience with a
Uh-huh.
sport for whatever reason. Maybe it was my neighborhood, but I was like all the bigger, most athletic kids always went to these other sports because there's more attention. And for the
Yeah.
super talented, I don't have a ton of friends that ever made it to professional athletics, but I have lots of friends that played the various levels of collegiate athletics. And
Hmm.
that's, if you're not getting paid directly, if someone's paying for your education, that's
It's
pretty good.
amazing.
It's a good
Yeah.
paycheck, right? Well, listen, Will, maybe we'll return to this subject in the future, and maybe we'll talk about when we went down to Brazil and
For sure.
we brought our submission coffee to put it up against that farmer's coffee. So, I mean, it sounds like amazing trip. We missed you. The podcast community missed you, but we missed you here in our home gym, and we have two gyms now that you're important too. You're looking after both our Ocotillo and Queen Creek. If you're listening in Chandler, you might want to go over and try Queen Creek just to say hello and have that experience, and just realize that our family has grown and there's probably different people that you might not otherwise get exposure to. So we encourage you to be aware that both exists. Well, Professor, anything that you'd want to wrap up our talk with before we
No, just
come to the
great,
conclusion?
great to be back. It was awesome to be in Brazil, see everything, but awesome to be back and feel that we have two homes, right?
Yes,
One in Brazil and one here, with embraced by this amazing culture and that amazing people that are around us, including you, Peter,
thank you.
and our audience, of course.
Yes, yes.
So glad to be back. See you guys
Uh,
later.
All right, we're back. So we're going to keep to our weekly cadence as best we can. So thank you for being patient, and you'll hear from us again. And since we didn't say it, if you're listening, and for whatever reason, this is the first time you tuned in, we want you to try jujitsu. And for those of you who are like me, you're still a beginner, we want you to stay in jujitsu. And if you're an expert, congratulations, you're one of the elite that made it to that level. And we want you to encourage the beginners and the people who haven't tried. So
Right on.
we're giving everybody a job out there. All right, Professor, we'll do this again next week. Thanks
See you
again.
later, brother.